Save the Farm Challenge. Farmer Jim's August Battle.
Gotta work the land, gotta dig deep with a calloused hand. The plow might break, but the spirit won't bend. Save the farm till the bitter end.
The call came early in the morning, breaking through the static of an old cell phone signal. Jim, Grandpa Walter's voice carried a weight Jim had never heard before. I'm out of money. The bank's breathing down my neck. If something doesn't change soon, we're going to lose the farm. Jim didn't even hesitate. He loaded his truck, hitched the trailer, and pointed it toward the only place that had ever truly felt like home. When he arrived, the sight nearly broke his heart. The canola fields glowed yellow, their pods heavy and ready for harvest. The wheat stood tall, golden and swaying in the August breeze. These crops were worth saving, but Grandpa hadn't been able to afford the help or fuel to bring them in. Jim climbed into the old combine, half expecting it not to start. It coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. For days he ran it from sunup to sundown, cutting through the fields, filling wagons with grain, and hauling it all to the elevator. It wasn't much, but the sales brought in just enough to cover immediate expenses and buy some time. The center field sat bare and brown, furrows long since carved by Grandpa's plow, but never planted. Jim remembered Grandpa saying, "That one's for later," but later had never come. Jim climbed into the Challenger tractor, its paint faded but still strong. He backed it up to the old cedar, locking the hitch with a satisfying clank. A cloud of dust followed as he eased the machine across the field, the cedar rattling and creaking as if complaining about the years it had sat idle. With each pass, tiny seeds dropped into the earth, a promise of fresh grass that would one day feed their Angus cattle. Jim couldn't help but smile. For the first time since he'd arrived, something was being planted instead of sold. Something new, something for the future. With the grass seed finally in the ground, Jim turned his attention to the rows of golden straw left behind from the wheat harvest. He leased a small square baler from the dealership in town, an older model but reliable enough for what he needed. Hooking it to the tractor, he drove back to the fields where the sun glinted off the dry stalks. The baler clattered and thumped with each bundle it tied, spitting out neat squares of straw like clockwork. Soon, a trailer full of bales sat ready for delivery. Jim hauled them to the animal dealer, who paid cash on the spot. It wasn't much, but every dollar counted. And as Jim drove back to the farm, he felt like he was finally gaining ground, turning what would have rotted in the field into something that actually kept the farm alive. But crops weren't the only problem. Down by the pasture, the Angus cattle stood in silence, their ribs faintly visible, their water trough dry and cracked. They had been surviving on what little they could forage from the meadow. Jim leaned against the fence, anger mixing with guilt. These animals didn't deserve to suffer. He made a quick plan. The bales went straight to the animal dealer in town for some quick cash. With that money, he bought hay, removed the sides from the livestock trailer, and rented a set of forks for the old John Deere. Soon, the trough was full, the cattle had hay, and Jim had leased a water barrel to haul fresh water from the well. When the cattle lowered their heads to eat, a quiet sense of relief settled over him. At least they wouldn't go hungry tonight. Later that week, Jim walked the farm to see what else could be done. Years of half-finished projects and forgotten equipment littered the property. Grandpa had started building a small shed years ago, but it was little more than a frame now, so Jim sold it for whatever he could get. A collapsing old shed in the lower yard was filled with junk that hadn't been touched in decades. Most of it went for scrap, but one item, a beautifully weathered antique pump, caught the eye of the local museum. To Jim's surprise, they paid $10,000 for it. That check went straight to the bank. It didn't wipe the debt away, but it eased the pressure. The bank could wait a little longer. At the edge of the property stood an old grain bin, its steel sides rusted through in spots, and the roof half collapsed from years of neglect. By the end of the day, the space was clear and the scrap metal loaded for sale. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep the lights on a little longer. By the end of August, Jim was exhausted. His hands were calloused, his back ached, and every muscle protested each morning when he swung his legs out of bed. But he'd done it. Fields were cleared, animals were fed, debts were trimmed, and the farm had a little life back in it. He stood on the porch one evening, looking out over the fields as the sun sank low. Grandpa sat beside him, silent, but there was a hint of a smile under his weathered mustache. "You did good, Jim," Grandpa finally said. Jim shook his head. "We're not there yet, Grandpa. This was just month one. The real challenge is still ahead." And with that, Farmer Jim knew he wasn't just here to help. He was here to save the farm, no matter what it took.